Let's talk about the Department of Education. What might happen? What might not? I saw where Trump had given his executive order to McMahon of, dismantling or slowly dismantling the Department of Education, moving the IDEA over to Health and Human Services, OCR somewhere else, the student loans over to the Small Business Administration. So, as you can tell, and I know that people, guys, I don't care who sits on the golden throne in DC. So I believe me, I've been through multiple administration changes over the 16 years of doing this. I don't care. I haven't seen a bit of difference. So those of you who think that there's some magical thing that comes out of the Department of Education, it hasn't helped me at all. Hasn't helped me as a parent. It hasn't helped me in this professional field. I know its stated duties over on the IDEA, and obviously he's not getting rid of that. In fact, that was the first thing that he said to everybody, is that I'm not getting rid of IDEA. We're moving it over here. So that's already been answered. And the other thing is that was created by Congress, and it's a Civil Rights Act. So it's not going anywhere. All right, it's just going to be moved. So therefore, I don't need to sit there and talk to you about what benefit we get from, the Office of Special Education Programs, OSEP, and their guidance. And I can tell you their guidance, for those of you who've taken Advocates University, because I go into detail as far as what OSEP does. And in the course book that we use, they provide guidance to the states on explanations, and that's where their, letters to John, all those little things come from. And I can tell you, most of them are quite ambiguous and broad. And or they sit there and they say, well, we really don't want to weigh in on this. All right. Then we have federal case law, and the case law is beneficial. But guess what? Federal court's going to be here. OK, and I don't even know if the federal court's going to agree with some of this stuff. So I'm just not going to get all emotional about it. And so you need to be careful about what you read, what you share on social media, and think for a second as to the source. What are you reading? Are you reading Education Week? Because I subscribe to it. I'm rethinking that. And I tell you what, it's just vitriolic. And I'm like, it doesn't even make sense. It's an emotional reaction. Have some maturity. We're the adults now. Have some maturity in thinking through this. The sky isn't falling. All right? Businesses contract. Governments should contract. All right? That's just, they don't make anything. They just consume. I don't like paying taxes. I don't know about you guys, but I don't like paying them. Okay? And we have a limited amount of resources. And we have trillions and trillions in debt. Okay, we can't even balance a budget, yet I'm required to balance a budget. Yet I'm required to report everything. Okay, they don't. And so I'm not going to sit there and hold them to some kind of higher standard as though they're better than me. So I don't have a problem with reducing a bloated workforce. I've seen the statistics with regards to the sheer amount of money in our education system at a local level, at a state level, and on a federal level, where we are overwhelmed and overburdened by a bunch of middle managers, administrators. Now, why? All making, more money than our teachers, and sure as hell more money in our aid supports. So do I necessarily have a problem with, us getting lean and mean? No, not at all. Okay. I know that the IDEA isn't going away. I know 504 isn't going away. I know OCR is not going away. I know OSEP is not going away. So real quick, okay, let's talk about how the federal government funds our schools. Now, we live in a bottom-up education system. Local schools have the majority of the control. They always have from the very beginning. State has minimal control. Our local schools, in the mass majority of our states, are created as little independent fiefdoms, independent corporations, governmental entities. And they're done that way for a reason. And if a state comes in, the Department of Education for a state comes in and takes over, it's only after multiple steps are taken to try to have that school work efficiently before a state takeover. And then there's very strict parameters on what happens, and then the state has to pull out. The feds don't do that. They don't rush in and take over schools, guys. They never have. So the federal government can only influence local schools through grants. Okay, and there's three main types of grants that the federal government uses in the education system to, influence education policy. Categorical grants, which are earmarked for very specific purposes. You have block grants, which have a lot more flexibility on how they're used. And then you have formula grants. The IDEA for special education is based upon formula grants. X, Y, and Z needs to happen in this calculation here, and the number of these students with these kind of needs. That's formula grants. And I'm not saying that it's necessarily the right way to go. All right, but IDEA has formula grants. Now, the other thing that you need to keep in mind is that the federal government, when the IDEA was passed, it is supplemental funding, guys. It's not mandatory. They're not mandated to fund special education. They're not the ones that created this problem. Once again, we have a bottom-up system. I'm not necessarily saying the states created a lot of the disenfranchisement, apathy, discrimination, and separation that existed depending on where you are in the country. I'm sure it was pervasive everywhere, but done in different ways. The IDEA is there to stop that and create a uniformity of how our identified children are treated and a base level of what the expectations are to serve them. Okay? So there's your Civil Rights Act. The states are there as a helpmate and a contribution source. The main contribution source is from the states. And then the local. All right? This is supplemental. This has to happen first. This is what maintenance of effort is. The states have to provide that to the federal government. This is what our special education commitment is in dollars. All right? And if that's not enough, then the local school has to pick up that gap, which, by the way, they should anyway, meaning that they should fund all students across the board equally. Now, I know a lot of the local schools don't do that. What they do is they try to get by with just the state funding and the federal contribution that's made, as though our special ed kids are somehow excised and different. And no, they're supposed to fund all students equally, state additional funding on top of that, and then you have the federal contribution, okay, done as a formula grant. So when IDEA changes, and he moves it over to the Department of Health and Human Services, people going, if they get rid of the Department of Education, they're going to go with block grants. Well, they might for the other areas, okay, the other grant areas that the Department of Education already does. It's not some waterfall and this beautiful trickling of money that goes down to the states, guys. It's not how it works. I mean, even our school lunch program, that's the Department of Agriculture. There's not some, chocolate fountain that's just flowing money over. It comes in the form of these grants with strings attached. And some of those strings, I can sit there and tell you, the Obama administration, for example, were holding schools hostage back between 2008 and 2016 to where they were threatening schools if they didn't give bathroom access to identifying students to stay away from that argument. But I'm just saying that the Obama administration was using grant money, specifically school lunch grant money, saying that you were going to be denied, you were going to be punitively punished by a denial of these resources if you don't allow access for identification students. Okay? So to sit there and go, Trump, or the states say, no, this game's been played for a long time. And I don't care if you're a Republican, Democrat, right, left, doesn't matter. This is the game that's been played. All right? Right or wrong. That's the game that's been played. You have grant money, you tie strings to it. This is a requirement. For the IDEA and special education, it is a formula grant system that's been going on since it started, okay? But once again, it's supplemental. The feds, when they created the IDEA, the Congress, they could, it's optional. They could fund it up to 40%. They've never gone above around 15, 16%. Usually it's around 14. All right, but that's the formula grant. It goes to each state. And at that point, I can tell you, depending on the state government, and this is where you as advocates and parents can help enhance accountability by going to your state legislature and requiring periodic audits or more accountability on how the money is spent from a federal level, on a state level, and on a local level, so that you have more transparency on how and where this money is going. Because I can tell you that in Alabama, I have caught multiple schools that are supplementing football head coach and assistant coach positions by making them glorified aides. Okay? So they have their base salary, and then they make them a glorified aid position. They're able to take out of Title I money, or they're able to take out of IDEA funds or state funding to supplement that base salary up, and they may make another like grant writer on top of the aid position money, to where the guy's a grant writer, a glorified aid along with the base salary to get them to $100,000, $120,000. And you sit there and say, well, why don't we have enough aides? It's not the feds, guys. It's your local schools and how they're spending the money. And you're not looking there. You're wanting to complain about what's happening in DC, but you're not looking at your check ledgers. You're not looking for the accountability where the accountability needs to happen, and that's your local schools. Okay? One of my biggest complaints about New Mexico, and we have an office there, is that there's they just sort of blob the money out there. And there's no distinguishment between this dollar and that dollar and this dollar as to where it comes from. So therefore, there's lack of accountability. It's something that some individuals that I know in New Mexico were all trying to change, but at least in Alabama, there's some accountability there that you can sit there and track it. Now, what's more difficult is to sit there and understand who your grant writer is, who your aides are. And this is where you need to go in and you need to ask for more transparency. But to sit there and scream about the Department of Education, where are they when all this crap's going on? This has been going on for the entirety of the 16 years I've been doing this. And I haven't seen the feds coming with a hammer going, oh my God, you're paying this coach for being a grant writer and an aide? How dare you? They don't look at it like that. They look at maintenance of effort. Here's our requirements, our base requirements, and hey, here's our pet project that if you don't do it, we're going to take your stuff away. Whether you agree with us or not. And we're going to bypass the democratic process by forcing you to do this or lose that funding. I don't agree with that. It's an unfunded mandate. I don't agree with that. I don't care what ideology you are. I don't agree with it. I don't agree with unelected bureaucrats forcing things that couldn't pass, a democratic vote. Okay? And to sit there and try to change the entire makeup of a state or a local system on your whims and what you think about those people that live there, shame on you. I lived all over the country, guys. I grew up in the same place for 18 years, but guys, I've lived in the Northeast. I've lived in upstate New York. I've lived in Florida, Texas, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah. Traveled all over the place, and I can tell you, everybody has their problems. They have their uniqueness. We have a wonderful, diverse country, but to sit there and make judgments against aspects of what you perceive as what's wrong with the Southeast or what's wrong with the Northwest, shame on you. You're not there. You're not the one paying the taxes, and these aren't your kids. So people need to sort of stick their nose back where it belongs, and that's on their face. All right? So these grants, categorical, block, formula grants, that's how the federal government does this, okay? It's not a chocolate fountain. So the fact that the Department of Education may be different, like I said, I hope it's lean, I hope it's mean, I hope it does an effective, efficient job, regardless of what it's called. And remember, it used to be the Office of Education before 1979. It was just part of the Health and Human Services Department. So it still existed, just existed differently.